So now that Christmas is here, unless I upload this in January, I figured I would give you guys something special with a review of something that is not an anime or Pokemon movie. RWBY is an internet show created by the company Rooster Teeth, who also created shows like Achievement Hunter, X-Ray and Valve, and their longest running series, Red vs. Blue. These guys are very popular in the gaming/animation community, and it's kind of funny that their humble beginnings were 5 guys wanting to make a series about reviewing games while drunk. So good job, alcohol! You finally did something right for the world that doesn't involve relieving stress. So how is the first volume of RWBY? Well, let's find out. The story begins with a prologue about the history of Remnant, aka the name of the world that the show takes place in. In the beginning, it was filled with supernatural beings and creatures known as the Creatures of Grimm. Oh, so that's what my father's been doing all this time. Anyways, once humans came around, they had a war against these beasts. A beast war, if you could call it. Eh? Whatever. Eventually, they found a material called dust, and they managed to win the war. Cut to present day, where this material is now used for abilities and weapons, and you have people going around trying to steal it for their own evil purposes. But what about the Creatures of Grimm? Well, while they were defeated, they were not exterminated. Those creatures are still around, and humans still hunt them down. Although those humans are called hunters/huntresses. Wait a minute. Did they just rip off Monster Hunter? Anyways, the first episode has the main antagonist of the volume, Roman Torchwick, trying to rob a place for its dust, and we get to see what his weapon is. A cane. Oh my god, that is so cool! But while this robbery is going on, one of Roman's goons tries to mug a girl in a red hood. This girl is Ruby Rose, our sort of main protagonist. She then proceeds to kick his ass to the curb. We then get to see her weapon, a scythe that can turn into a rifle, and we get to see her tear apart some more goons. Eventually, Roman gets involved in the fight, and then he escapes. We then cut to Ruby getting scolded by Glinda Goodwitch, which is apparently a reference to Wizard of Oz, and then Ozpin, the headmaster of Beacon Academy, comes in. We hear Ruby's reasons for becoming a huntress, and then Ozpin, who saw her motivation and skills as great, offers to let Ruby join the freshman year of the academy he is the headmaster of. She accepts, and we get introduced to 2 more characters. Yang, Ruby's half-sister, who's basically a pair of tits for most of the volume, and Jean-Arc, who is airsick. The remaining episodes of Volume 1 mostly focus on Ruby's adventures at the Academy, whether it be her initiation into the Academy, her forming Team RWBY, her interactions with Wise and Blake, or dealing with the antagonist Roman and his gang known as the White Fang. But the show isn't just about her. We also have some episodes where RWBY is not the main focus. For instance, the last 2 episodes of Volume 1 have a focus on Blake, who used to be a member of the White Fang since they were formerly a symbol of peace and unity between humans and Faunus, which are basically humans with physical animal traits. That's right, Blake has animal traits as well. That being adorable cat ears. Screw Yang, Blake is best waifu. But eventually the White Fang had a new leader and effectively turned the group into basically a terrorist group, so Blake decided, yeah, no, I'ma leave. But with these 2 episodes, it puts the spotlight on someone else, and it helps the viewer sympathize/understand this character a lot more, since we know more about this character and her bond with certain characters, while we also get to see these Faunus kick ass against the main antagonist in between those moments. Another example of this was earlier on in the series with Jean-Arc. He gets several episodes where he's the main protagonist of the episode, and we get to see what his deal is. Now, unlike other characters, he doesn't use a weapon that can turn into a gun. It's just a sword and shield. But by the time episode 14 hits, we get to see Jean kick ass with these weapons. But back on topic, that's probably this volume's strongest trait. Its characters. Sure, not all the characters are deep, but all the characters we see in Volume 1 that have a name at least has the framework set up for later development. What also helps this part of the show is the interaction/chemistry. This is something that I also believe was handled pretty well, since it made for some pretty memorable moments in the volume. To me though, my favorite interactions were either any scene with Wise and RWBY, or any scene with Jean and Pyra. Seeing Wise and RWBY argue/respond to each other usually gave me a chuckle when I saw it, and Jean and Pyra's interactions were pretty interesting to see as well, especially in the episodes where Jean is the main focus. Though sometimes Pyra and Jean's interactions seem a little, how do I put this? Designed for shippers? Then again, if they actually did become a thing, I think it'd be kind of cool. Sorry, random shipping moment there. But what about the villains? Are they any good? Oh yes, I freaking love Roman in this volume. Whether it be his weapon, his suave voice, his personality, or even his fights, this antagonist certainly kept me interested as I was watching the first volume, and I'm excited to see what he will do in Volume 2. But that's it for the characters. As for the music, this is another element handled well. Jeff Williams, composer of the Red vs. Blue series, does an excellent job with the music of the show. From This Will Be the Day to I Burn, these songs are very catchy, filled with energy, and have good lyrics to them. It's probably the first time since I started this little project that I can say I like the soundtrack in something. I also like the fights in this volume. I think they were well choreographed and it was fun to watch. But now that I have given my positives to the show, it's time to address my problems. First one being one you have seen since I started this review, the animation. Unlike other animated shows, this one uses a different style of CG animation, and it could be a turnoff for some people since it looks so strange. Personally, I don't mind the animation that much, and I think it does look stylish, but this one's up to personal taste. However, this next problem is its characters. As I mentioned before, certain characters aren't as deep as others, but have the framework built in for future development, but that's still an issue. A bunch of characters feel bland and underdeveloped. That issue may be fixed in Volume 2 and 3, but that is still an issue in Volume 1, so I'm going to bitch. But that's really all I have to complain about. I thought this volume was really good, and I do highly recommend you give it a try at least. The episodes are available on YouTube, iTunes, Amazon. Hell, you can get it on Netflix where they compiled all the volume episodes into one long movie. But that concludes this review. I'm the Mounty, and have a happy holidays. Back in December of last year, I reviewed Volume 1 of Rooster Teeth's show, RWBY. Since then, I have seen Volume 2 to completion, and also saw the last half of Volume 3. So now that I've seen Volume 2 to completion, and since I hate leaving things unfinished, let's take a look at RWBY's second volume. So, what's the plot of this volume? Well, after the events of Volume 1, Team RWBY decides to try and investigate the meaning behind the dust thefts, as well as trying to stop the White Fang, Roman, and the newly introduced villain, Cinderfall, from succeeding in their evil schemes. While that's going on, we also get introduced to several new characters, both good and evil. Some examples include the previously mentioned Cinderfall, who's basically Roman's boss, Neptune, who's Sun Wukong's friend and also has a thing for Wise, and General James Ironwood, who not only commands the military, but is also the headmaster of an academy in Atlas, located in the northern region of the world RWBY takes place in. There are also other events going on in Volume 2, such as a formal dance, the team's first mission, Yang helping Blake and also stating her mission is to find her mother, a big fight in the city of Beacon, etc. But in the end, they defeat a lot of Grimm, Roman gets imprisoned, and Yang finds her mother Raven Bronwyn in an after-credits scene.
I'm here to talk to you about the Avenger Initiative.
And one that never gets followed up on.
God damn it. Anyways, as a story, it's pretty good. Sure, the main plot of stopping the bad guys is basic, but it's the subplots that make the story structure strong in my opinion. But before I delve into that, I want to touch on one thing I felt was a problem in Volume 1, but was fixed in this volume. The length and pacing. With Volume 1, some episodes were less than 10 minutes long and were also multi-parters. Now watching them in bulk, that's not a big deal since you can just go to the next episode and continue on. But when that volume first came out, these episodes were released once a week, so the sort of rushed pacing and length was a problem for those viewing this weekly. But now, each episode is about 12 minutes minimum, which allows for a slower pace, but also allows more development for the characters, as well as more time for world building. Speaking of which, let's talk about the subplots involving character development and or character growth. The first one that comes to mind is Weiss. With Volume 1, Weiss, while not my least favorite character, was one that I didn't particularly care for. With Volume 2, however, that changed. We got to find out more about her past, her motivation for becoming a huntress, her relationship with other characters, we found out about her sister and father and what she thinks of her father, and you know what? I started to like this character more after finding out these little tidbits. Sure, it's not much character development, but expanding on a character previously introduced is not a bad thing either, because now that we know more about this character, it opens up a lot of potential character arcs that could also lead to character development later down the line. So, yeah, I like Weiss now.
So does that mean she's better than Blake?
No, Blake is still best waifu. Speaking of Blake, though, I also thought she was good in this arc. We find out her reasons for becoming a huntress, we get a nice scene with her and Yang, we also get a nice scene with her and Wukong at the dance, and we also find out her past with Ozpin, as well as her past with a character named Adam Taurus. Overall, I like the character arc Blake went through. It was pretty good. RWBY didn't get much in terms of development, but still, she had good chemistry with her team as well as funny moments with other characters, and she was still relevant to the plot. Now on to Yang, and this was a surprise for me. When I talked about her in Volume 1, I didn't particularly like her, but now, she's a lot better. She has an interesting motivation for becoming a huntress, we find out about her past, and that was pretty interesting. And she has good chemistry with the characters she interacts with. Overall, this volume made me care about Yang as a character, and if it can do that, I gotta give it credit because I really didn't like her in Volume 1. As for our side characters, they're also pretty good. Team Juniper has some interesting moments. A couple of my favorite moments with them were the shipping scenes and the dance scene. And we also get to see more teams in action this time around, such as Team Coffee, whose leader has a suitcase as a weapon? Okay, that's the most awesome thing I have seen. As for our villains, we got Emerald and Mercury, who have good chemistry and interesting personalities. Roman's boss, Cinderfall, who really doesn't do much in this volume aside from her fight with Ruby in episode 7, but it's okay personality-wise. And Roman, who I still find funny as well as threatening at points, and he's still probably my favorite antagonist of the volumes. As for Neo, well, aside from her fight with Yang, there's not much else to her character. Still, that was a good action scene. But speaking of action, let's talk about another improved aspect of Volume 2. The animation. Sure, the style of animation can still potentially be a turnoff for some people, but aside from that, the animation in this volume is much more refined than Volume 1's animation. Largely because they have more experience with the program now, but I digress. The lighting and coloring is much better, the effects look a lot better, the backgrounds look a lot better. Hell, they even fixed up a minor issue in Volume 1 where some of the background characters in scenes such as the city were literally black silhouettes. Now, these silhouettes look like goddamn people. But that's it for animation. As for the music, I find the music in this volume is just as good as the music in Volume 1, if not better at points. With Volume 1, my favorite songs were the intro and some of the character theme songs, but in Volume 2, we have the new intro song, Time to Say Goodbye, which I feel is much better than Volume 1's opening because I find it catchier, had a better tempo and rhythm, good lyrics, and overall more energy than This Will Be the Day. Other songs I liked were Die for its lyrics and rhythm, Caffeine for its catchy beat, great guitar use, and catchy lyrics, and Shine because of its rhythm, lyrics, and overall catchy feel. No joke, Jeff Williams and Casey Williams really stepped up the game here when it came to the music department. Good job. The voice acting is also a lot better than Volume 1. Our main leads turn in good performances, but even the minor and side characters turn in performances I would classify as decent at worst, great at best. Some examples include Cinder's gang, Neptune, Ironwood, and Adam Taurus. This would also be the last volume where Lee Ren was voiced by series creator Monty before his tragic passing in 2015. After that point, Neethum, Monty's brother, took over the role. But that's about it. There weren't really a lot of flaws I could find with Volume 2 as I did with Volume 1, and I could list other things I liked about Volume 2, such as the references to Rooster Teeth's other works, the scenes with Zwei, etc., but I think you get the point. Overall, I think Volume 2 of RWBY is much better than the first volume, and I highly recommend watching it. Besides, after this volume, we would see firsthand what happens to the mostly lighthearted tone of RWBY when it falls. I am not looking forward to reviewing that volume. Well, guys, here we are. Last year, I covered RWBY Volume 1 as a contribution to Red Ribbon Reviewers. Last July, I covered Volume 2. And now, 5 months later, it's time for me to cover Volume 3 of Rooster Teeth's original series, RWBY. Now, like I said in my intro skit, this season seems to be pretty split down the middle when it comes to reception from its fan base. Some liked it, others hated it. Hell, even when Volume 3 was announced, a lot of fans were raising their eyebrows about it. Because as I said in my last review of RWBY, the creator of RWBY, Monty passed away in 2015. So when Volume 3 was announced, a lot of questions were raised. How would they do this volume without the original creator? Would the series go downhill with new writers and directors on board? Would Rooster Teeth air a trailer announcing a new entry in the RWBY saga and then revealed to be a pachinko machine? But I'm getting ahead of myself. So with Monty passing, co-directors Carrie Shacross and Miles Luna were promoted to the roles of director and writer and announced that the show would continue as planned. That's not the only change this volume would get. The show's tone also began a gradual transition from a mostly light-hearted tone with serious moments at points to a somewhat serious tone with a few light-hearted moments at points. So is this a change for the better? Let's find out. The story of RWBY Volume 3 revolves around the Vetus Festival, which is a festival between the four kingdoms of Remnant, where they have their best students demonstrate their skills and abilities in celebration of the peace between all four kingdoms. RWBY and her team, as well as the other teams at Beacon, enter the tournament and things seem to be normal, but underneath the surface lies a terrible plot concocted by Cinderfall and her cronies that threatens to destroy the peace between the four kingdoms. But Cinder isn't the only one with plans underneath the surface. Ozpin, Glinda, RWBY's Uncle Crow Branwen, and General Ironwood also have a plan to stop Cinder by utilizing a power that most people in the world of Remnant thought was merely a legend. But in the end, Cinder succeeds in her plan, two of RWBY's friends are killed, Blake and Weiss are separated from RWBY, and Beacon falls to the Grim. So with all hope lost, RWBY goes off with Jean's team, while the rest of our heroes attempt to rebuild. That is probably the quickest way I can describe this story because, whoa boy, the story this time around is a lot more complex than Volume 2's story. You got the Tournament of Vetus Festival, you got Cinder's plan, you got Ozpin's plan, you got the Maiden's plot, you got the backstory of Amber, current Fall Maiden, Cinder, Mercury, and Emerald. You got the internal conflict with Pyrrha potentially becoming the next Fall Maiden to stop Cinder, but at the cost of potentially not being the same person. There's a lot of shit this time around to go through. Now that's not to say Volume 2 didn't have anything real going on, because it certainly did. But in contrast to Volume 3, it's pretty small when it comes down to long-term effects on the show. With Volume 3, the main plot is brought back up again in Volume 4, a show when the new big-time villain Salem wants to get the 3 remaining maidens. The death of a certain character still has an effect on the show with episode 2 of Volume 4. Now compare that to Volume 2's plot points. Did the dance ever get brought up again in Volume 3? Hell, did we find out what the conversation between Raven and Yang was? No. But just because something has a lot of plot to it, it doesn't really mean much if that plot is garbage. Thankfully, however, I think Volume 3's plot is pretty solid. I like the story of the maidens, and I feel it really helped the story when it came to the world building department. I like the flashback episode since we got to see tiny bits of characters from the current Fall Maiden, as well as how Cinder recruited Emerald and Mercury to reside. I liked how the internal conflict with Pyrrha was written, not only since it shows another side of Pyrrha, one of weakness when she's usually the strongest of her team, but also because this internal conflict feels realistic / relatable. Now yes, stuff like aura transfers don't happen in the real world, but if I was given an offer that could change my life forever if I accepted, but at the potential cost of losing something big, like, I don't know, never seeing my friends or family again, I would also be scared, conflicted, confused, and also under a lot of pressure from it, since it feels like a lot of pressure was thrust onto my shoulders, and I wouldn't know how to handle it, especially if it happens all at once. And with all this pressure thrust on her, this causes Pyrrha to make a big mistake during one of her fights, causing an emotional breakdown from her after the fact. Damn. But even after all that, she's not out of the woods at all. In fact, it gets worse for her. She doesn't get the Fall Maiden power since Cinder comes in and steals it during the transfer process, and eventually has to fight Cinder at the top of the communications tower, which, you know what? I'm not even going to spoil what happens. Look, if I didn't like Pyrrha by this point in the volume, I certainly would feel something towards this character by Volume 3, because honestly, I think the writers did a very good job displaying her internal conflict with the audience and making us care about her. But while on the topic of characters, I feel like when it comes to this category, a lot of the characters were handled pretty well in this volume. I like Cinder a lot more in this volume than, say, Volume 2, because she proved to be a very intelligent and powerful threat to our heroes, even to the point of succeeding in her plans. Goddamn. I like the backstory given to Emerald and Mercury, as well as getting to see their abilities in action. Hell, I even thought the newer characters were okay. Sure, not all of them have a lot of depth to them, such as most of the students from the other academies, but characters like Winter and Crow did start to grow on me after a while, and I did like their moments where they got to spend time with their family members. As for Team RWBY, well, in all honesty, not a lot has changed when it comes to these characters in terms of development. Hell, I think one of the only moments where we see character development from Weiss and RWBY is in the finale, and that's when Weiss joins up with RWBY to reach the freaking communications tower. And I say that's development because this is Weiss we're talking about, the same girl who didn't like RWBY in the beginning. Now, in Volume 3, she is risking her skin to help her friend. That is some really good character development. However, Yang doesn't get much in terms of character development, and while she does sustain a big injury, it's probably not going to mean much until Volume 4, so she doesn't really get much in terms of new abilities either. In all honesty, if you didn't like Yang in Volumes 1 or 2, you probably won't like her in Volume 3 either. And as for Blake, the same thing happens to her as well. Not much development goes her way, and by the end, she leaves her friends behind. At least with Weiss, she left because of her father essentially dragging her away. Blake literally abandoned her friends once they landed in a safe zone. What the hell? Much like Yang, I have hopes that Volume 4 will do something with her, but for now, she was probably my least favorite of the 4 in terms of this volume, and of course, least favorite waifu. As for the animation, this was another big step up in comparison to Volume 2. The backgrounds look a lot crisper, the effects look better, the fight scenes have better choreography and are a lot more fluent. This looks really damn good to look at. Now yes, the animation could still be seen as a turn-off to some people, but I think that the animation in this volume is still a lot better than the animation seen in Volume 2. Speaking of improvements, the music is once again very well done. A lot of the tracks are very fitting given the tone of the volume, they have a great variety of instruments and beats, and are overall very catchy. Voice work is still very good, and we even have some big name voice actors this time around. Vic Mignogna voices Crow, Yuri Lowenthal was the new voice for Mercury, hell, Jen Taylor is known for playing Princess Peach at one point, plays the role as Salem, who appears at the end of the series.
Sorry, fanbase, but your appearance is in another castle.
But I think it's time I wrap it up here. Overall, I consider RWBY Volume 3 to be the best of the series thus far. It has a much deeper story than before and has the serious tone well, and manages to do a great job fixing the issues Volume 2 had going for it. So good job to the team behind RWBY Volume 3, and I am excited to see what you bring to the table for Volume 4. So that concludes this review.
So after the events of episode 11, where Amber was killed by Cinderfall, we start off the episode with a fight scene between Osmond and Cinder?
Wait, her name is Amber? Shit, I called her Autumn in that review. Also, holy crap, is the Headmaster actually fighting? This is awesome! Fuck yeah!
I know, right? We get to see a glimpse of what Ozpin can do, and we see that with the full power of the Fall main, Cinder's fire attacks are even stronger than before.
This is amazing!
And it ends in 30 seconds.
Are you serious? Why would you spend several episodes building him up to do something big during this attack on Beacon, and then have the payoff be a short fight and have it end off screen?
Yeah, I'll be coming back to this later, but for now, I'm just gonna continue the synopsis. So after that awesome but short fight, we cut over to the remains of Beacon Academy, where Oobleck and Peterport are trying to evacuate all the students to Vale, and dear my god, these guys aren't looking too good. Nora and Lee Ren are injured and can't fight, Blake's down for the count, the other students are weakened due to the fight with the Mech and Grimm, and Yang lost her hand thanks to Adam in a previous episode. Perfect, another arm to add to my collection.
But when Ruby realizes that Jean and Pyrrha aren't there, she decides to go off and find them herself.
But Ruby's not gonna do this alone. Weiss, the same girl who didn't like Ruby in the beginning of the series, volunteers to help her find them, and the two run off. So after Jean and Pyrrha escape the vault, they hear the tower behind them rumbling, and with them fearing for the worst, that being Ozpin losing, Pyrrha makes a big sacrifice and goes back in there. Jean tries to stop her, but Pyrrha, determined to try and stop Cinder herself, kisses Jean before shoving him into a pod that sends him away from the area.
What? After 3 volumes, these two finally kissed.
I know, right?
Shippers.
Mark, this ship is going to crash soon, okay? Let us enjoy this moment while we still can.
So inside Ozpin's office, Cinder walks in and makes eye contact with the Grim Dragon and communicates with it. How?
I agree. How can she do this?
Well, as we see in Volume 4, she is working with someone who may or may not be tied with the Grimm, and we did see her use the spider Grimm-like creature earlier in the series, so maybe she has an associate that taught her how?
Still doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, and even then, that's just a guess, David.
At least I bothered to back up my claim. So the two have their fight, and I gotta admit, this was a pretty damn good last stand for Pyrrha. She threw everything she had at Cinder and gave it her all, even after losing her weapons for a brief moment in the fight.
No, just no. Why did this get more attention than the Ozpin fight? Seriously, this fight is 3 minutes long while the Ozpin fight is 30 seconds long. And how is it that Pyrrha could last longer than Ozpin when he fought Cinder? Just why?
It's later. First off, Mark, we don't know if it was 30 seconds in real time. Remember, this fight had a lot of jump cuts in between actions, so it's very much likely that the fight lasted a while. Hell, it must have taken some time since Jean and Pyrrha were able to get out of the vault and make it back to the entrance to the tower before it began to crumble. Because I don't care how fast elevators are in this world, but that could not have been 30 seconds for them to make it to the elevator and make it back to the entrance. It just seems impossible. And second of all, this is Pyrrha's last stand, so of course it's going to get more attention, because this is her last fight. Ozpin, as we later see in Volume 4, survives his encounter with Cinder. Pyrrha, on the other hand, doesn't. Hence why she gets more attention in this fight than Ozpin did in his fight.
Still doesn't negate my point that she lasted longer than Ozpin.
Yeah, I'm just gonna continue the review. So while the fight is going on, Cinder commands the Grim Dragon to attack the tower, and she succeeds, destroying the top of it and effectively shutting down all communications in Vale. After this, Cinder overpowers Pyrrha, while Ruby, with help from Weiss, runs up the tower to see what happens next. Cinder shoots Pyrrha through the heart and incinerates her. One of my favorite characters in this series, and part of one of my favorite ships, is now dead.
Shot through the heart and...
Shut up, David!
Dick.
This was, in my opinion, one of the worst moments of the episode. Pyrrha's death could have been avoided if this stupid maiden plot wasn't brought in early on in the volume. And as a shipper of Pyrrha and Jean, this death also infuriated me, because now that ship is sunk, and the fact that they did kiss moments before her death only serves to make the blow much harder for me to take in. Why did they make this stupid maiden's plot in the first place? Seriously. It essentially plagued half of this volume, which was already crowded, mind you, and it forced Pyrrha to deal with a tacked-on destiny. This is awful!
Well then, as for me, while I did feel sad that Pyrrha died, I also understood why it had to happen. To show that not even those close to the main cast were safe. It showed that no one was safe in this series now. They showed it with Penny. They showed it with Roman, and they showed it here. On top of that, this death also helped with developing other characters as shown with Volume 4, and it did help with opening up a lot more character arcs for the cast. I have said this before, but it bears repeating. If a character's death ends up helping the show more than hurting it, then I am okay with the character dying.
Well, regardless of what you think of Pyrrha's death, this causes RWBY to activate a new power which completely covers the area in white, possibly incinerates Cinder and the Grim Dragon, and then we cut to white noise. You know, there's a word for something like this.
I think I know that word as well.
Deus Ex Machina!
I mean, seriously, there is no better way to describe it. It comes right out of nowhere, and it stops the crisis just like that.
Now, yes, we later find out that the Grim Dragon is frozen and not killed, but it still doesn't erase the fact that this came right out of nowhere and stopped the events on the tower.
Exactly. Oh, and before anyone tries to argue that it didn't come out of nowhere since Ozpin made a comment about it, I will happily point out that it was only mentioned once throughout the entire series up to this point, and it was in Volume 1's first episode. This was never mentioned again until this episode. This is not how you build up to something.
I do have to agree, it's really poor writing to make a mention of Ruby Silver Eyes in the beginning of the series, and then never mentioned again until Volume 3. There's build-up, and then there's pulling things out of your behind because you wrote yourself into a corner. And the fact that this sun power-up saved the day makes it much more infuriating.
I know, right? So David, what do you have to say to that? Are you going to try and defend this too?
No. While I will somewhat question the use of the term Deus Ex Machina, since at the end of the day Beacon still falls to the Grim, I will agree that it did come out of nowhere. Monty had 2 volumes to build this up, and if the rumors were true that he made plans up to the 7th volume, then he should have gone back to volume 2 before production had begun on it and added in some build-up, or at least mentioned it. You know, so that it's relevant to the series and not an offhand comment Ozpin made. But I do agree with you two. This was a poor way to wrap up the fight, since the whole Silver Eyes was only brought up as a comment once, and it was in the beginning of the series.
Okay, so after the white light, Ruby wakes up in her home and we get a huge exposition dump from her uncle explaining that Ozpin's whereabouts are unknown, the dragon is somehow frozen but is still able to attract the Grim to the remains of Beacon Academy, tells Ruben that she is special due to the silver eyes that her mother also had, and also explains that they are destined to lead the life of a warrior, and that the Grim fear those eyes. He will have to continue Ozpin's work, and finally explains that his investigations led him all the way to Haven. Seriously guys, we lost the Ozpin fight for this exposition dump? Pathetic.
To make things worse, we find out from Yang that Weiss got essentially dragged away by her father to her home of Atlas, and Blake ran off. Are you kidding me? Look, I hate Adam Taurus as much as I hate Alteria's, but he made a good point about Blake always running away. The girl made a promise to Yang earlier in the series, and I would understand why she would leave out of guilt, since she felt horrible about what happened to Yang, and wasn't able to help her during that incident. But it wasn't out of guilt. The girl ran away because she was a scaredy cat.
I get it.
Shut up, David. This was a major blow to her character for me. And the fact that she ran away and abandoned her friends because she was scared is infuriating to me. Not only because I was a fan of this character, but also because it strengthens Adam's point about Blake always running away. When I have to agree with the bad guy with no redeemable qualities, you know someone screwed up big time. So we get a bit of a time jump to the winter season, and we see Ruby leave her home with the remains of Team Juniper as they head off to Haven.
But before the volume can conclude, we get introduced to the woman who was occasionally giving narration throughout the series and the narrator for the first volume of World of Remnant, Salem.
Who is completely unnecessary to this finale. Seriously, why is she here? Especially without explanation or reason. Then that's it. That's it for the season finale. Sorry, Pierre and Blake fans. Enjoy your several-month hiatus. But don't worry, we got this abysmal comedy series to keep you waiting, because that's clearly what everyone wanted to see.
So, I take it you two hated it?
Yes! The Deus Ex Machina was awful. There were so many questions raised by this episode that weren't answered. Like how Cinder could talk to the dragon, or how could she even access the vault? The exposition dump was terribly executed. The treatment of the characters was awful. Pyrrha's death was awful. And the fact that her fight scene got more attention than Ozpin's is still infuriating. Ozpin's fight was awful. This was a terrible finale, and I meant what I said in my topic sense. The season finale was so terrible, it made me drop RWBY altogether. And even if Volume 4 does manage to answer some of the questions this finale presented, the damage has already been done.
Despite my complaints with this episode, I didn't hate this finale, contrary to what Zareth over there told you. I felt Cinder was a decent antagonist, and certainly dominated in this finale, to the point of being pretty much OP at points. I felt that it was a decent transition to the darker tones Volume 4 presents, and even Pyrrha's death did a good job opening up new character arcs for characters like Jean, as we see in Volume 4's second episode. So while I do have my issues with this finale, I did genuinely enjoy it.
Okay. And as for me, I felt it was a good finale. It was a good transition to Volume 4's darker tone. I like that the conflict didn't end on a happy note since it opens up potential storylines in the future where they have to stop the Grim Dragon again when they're much stronger, as well as other story ideas. I like the reveal of Salem at the end, and I like the change to the status quo the first 2 volumes had. So overall, a great end to a great volume of this show. And I think it's time to wrap this up. So take care everyone, and have a happy holidays. Took me a while to get to this one, but here we are. RWBY Volume 4, released in fall 2016, is the 4th season of the RWBY series originally created by Mounty. But I bet most of you watching this video already knew about that, so let's not waste any more time and get straight in. Oh right, forgot about that. Look, I'll make this quick. RWBY Chibi is a comedic spin-off of RWBY that was meant to hold people over until Volume 4 came out. That's about it. The comedy is decent, same with the animation, but I didn't really care much about it. I knew it existed, but I just wasn't entertained that much by it. If you liked it, good for you, and I hope you enjoyed the second season that just came out a few days ago, but I didn't really care for it. Now on to Volume 4. So, after the finale of Volume 3, Volume 4's story takes place sometime after that event, with RWBY and the remnants of Team Juniper heading off to Haven Academy. But while that's going on, Salem's group is plotting to get the other maidens, and it is at this point we get introduced to the rest of her group. We of course have Cinder, who somehow survived the Silver Eyes attack, but at the cost of losing her eye and having her vocal cords damaged for some reason. Tyrion, the Scorpion Faunus, who doesn't know what personal space means. Watts, who has a lot of sass but little action in the volume. And Hazel, who has a lot of strength but also barely does anything in this volume. But that's not all the story has to offer. We also get to see what the other members of Team RWBY have been up to since the end of Volume 3, as well as what happened to Ozpin. And to be honest, I like the story this time around. Addendum. Of potentially many, we'll see. Looking back on this volume, I thought the side plots were interesting mostly. Except for Yang's story, because holy fuck did the writers not understand how PTSD works, and she got over her lost arm rather quickly. And, on top of that, the main plot with Team Juniper and RWBY was boring, paced poorly, and didn't lead to much overall. Basically, I liked most of the side plots, but the main story sucked ass! Anyways, back to the original video. Not only because it answers some of the questions Volume 3's finale brought up, such as why did Blake leave her group behind and how did John cope with losing Pyrrha, but also because it does a decent job setting up future events later down the line. And while I could bitch about how it leaves more questions than answers, that's kind of the point of these long series that are still running. If they gave us all the answers right away, there'd be no suspense or excitement for what's next. So they leave in more questions than answers so that the audience can get excited for the next one, hoping those questions are answered, and then the cycle repeats. That said, if none of those major questions are answered by the end of the series, then I will complain about that because there's no excuse by that point. You're at the end, try wrap everything up, but I digress. The story is good. As for the characters, I think this element was handled very well this time around. I liked a lot of the newer characters, like Gira, Tyrion, and Klein. I liked the backstory for Ren and Nora, as well as seeing how Jean has been coping with Pyrrha's loss. And I like seeing Weiss, Blake, and Yang getting development in this arc, as well as seeing what they've been up to since the Volume 3 finale. As for the animation, I think this is a big improvement over the last 3 volumes. It's a lot more expressive at points. I like the cell shading used for the characters, and even the movement is pretty fluent, as always. And as for the music, I think it was handled pretty well, but not as well as previous volumes. I like the opening song, Let's Just Live, and even a couple of the remixes were good, but a lot of the other songs were just meh or forgettable to me. Hell, I barely remember Weiss's song in Chapter 6, and Weiss was one of my favorite characters in the show. So yeah, soundtrack is still good, but I think the other volumes handled it better. Oh, and since voice acting counts as part of the audio, and since I'll be kicking myself later if I don't mention it, I think the voice actors turned in a great performance as always. And I was genuinely surprised when I found out 2 more big name VAs from Funimation, Chris Sabat and Josh Grell, were voicing 2 of the bad guys introduced in this arc. I just wish that they had more of a role in this volume, but hey, maybe Volume 5 might give them more of a role.
Do you find such malignance necessary?
Shut the hell up, bitch!
But now I think it's time to wrap things up. Overall, Volume 4 of RWBY is really good. It manages to do a good job answering some of the questions presented in the Volume 3 finale, while also improving the animation and character elements of the series, and I'm very much excited to see what Rooster Teeth brings to the table later this year when Volume 5 comes out. But until then, I'm the Mounty, and have a good one. So after Volume 4 concluded with Team Ranger arriving in Mistral via airship, the series' main plot revolves around the team training for the upcoming arrival of Salem's forces at Haven Academy in a month to wish to steal one of the 4 relics of the World of Remnant for themselves. Oh, and it's also revealed that Ozpin is actually the guy who gave the 4 maidens their powers long ago and has since been reincarnated into several bodies over the centuries due to his failure to stop Salem, with Oscar being the newest body for him to inhabit because,
he was a fan of Full Metal Alchemist? Okay, in all seriousness, it's explained that he can reincarnate in bodies with a similar mindset as his, but wouldn't that be a funnier condition for who he reincarnates as? But I digress. But while the main plot is going on, Yang and Weiss are off to Mistral as well, and Blake is dealing with the White Fang threat, before eventually the three reunite with RWBY and fight against Cinder, Emerald, Mercury, and Hazel for a bit before the Spring Maiden is revealed, and the relic is ultimately taken by our heroes for protection, ending Volume 5's story with Cinder being frozen, Adam turning into a whiny pissant, and Leo getting killed by Salem. So yeah, while it may have sounded like a lot happened, especially in comparison to Volume 4, which was mainly just walking for most of its main plot, it takes a long time to get there because the pacing is dragged out at points. I know the other volumes have had their pacing issues, but in this case, it was bad enough for me to notice, unlike the previous volumes, which I didn't notice that much when watching.
Ruby, you just killed Weiss because you moved my hands out of the way of her injury.
For instance, the training lasts less than a single episode, and then we never see them train again. If anything, the fight at the Belladonna Mansion has more time given to it, and that's because it's over the course of 3 episodes, but that's because it's paced poorly, largely because it keeps getting cut away for either exposition that goes on for too long at points, or scenes of our characters talking that is unrelated to the mansion fight. Hell, even the training itself is really short, almost like it doesn't fucking matter or something, because all RWBY is getting trained on is how to fight hand to hand. Yeah, I'm sure that'll be useful against a Grim or a guy with a sword that can chop your hand off. Oh, and you know, it's not like RWBY has an ability inside her that could be worked on further instead of something she already uses to begin with. Oh, what was that name again? Oh yeah, the Silver Eyes! You know, the thing that you've barely used or developed since you introduced it in Volume 3? Just saying, guys. But the worst example of the pacing problems is the final fight in the main hall near the end of the volume. Note how I said main hall and not Raven versus Cinder, because we'll get to why I didn't include that in a moment. It takes 4 episodes to wrap that shit up, and that's not because there's a lot going on, but because there's a lot of talking, dead air, the characters just standing around during a fight scene, or even worse, ending fights off screen / cutting out most of the fight. Are you for real? There are other problems with the fight scenes in this season, but I'll touch on that during the animation section. For now, let's just say that RWBY Volume 5 is the best example of how not to do fight scenes, and you know what's worse? They had a good example in this final stretch of episodes to use for this fight. The fight with Cinder and Raven! In that fight, it's choreographed well, it's paced well, there are hardly any pauses, and what a shock, they show the entire fight! Did another freaking director handle this scene or something? Why wasn't this person involved in the other fight scenes this volume? They could have made them work! Or, wait, was it the same guy? Because if yes, why? You had a good fight scene here! You could have applied that to the other fight seasonally, so why not do that? Fuck! And while yes, the story doesn't have a lot of plot holes and the story actually goes somewhere, unlike Volume 4's main story, the pacing severely hurts the story because not only does it drag its feet at numerous points, but it's also guilty of going too fast sometimes, like the previously mentioned training. I'm not asking for either extreme of pacing here. All I'm asking for is, at minimum, a decent pace for your storytelling. But that's not the case here, and that sucks. I will say that it's better than Volume 4, my second least favorite volume of RWBY, but only because stuff actually happened in the main plot this time around. Character-wise, it's okay. I like the scenes with Weiss, Yang, and Blake since they either help develop the bonds between them or expand further on the characters, and I was glad to see RWBY get some form of development that wasn't development in strength. However, I felt that characters like Crow, Oscar, Nora, and Ren weren't that interesting as characters this time around, and I barely remembered them as the volume went on, but I digress. Speaking of forgettable, I don't like Leo's character since he was really uninteresting and whiny. Hell, I didn't even care when Salem slaughtered him. I didn't like how Arthur Watts is used in this season since he only appeared a couple times in this time and he barely did anything. And I was rolling my eyes when Emerald and Mercury were on screen because most of the time they were on screen, they were just wasting time. Oh, and don't even get me started on Adam Taurus. Remember when he was a threat in Volume 3? Remember when he chopped off Yang's hand and decapitated Blake's shadow? Yeah, well now he's a whiny bitch who killed the former head of the White Fang because he wanted to be in charge, barely does anything as leader, gets thwarted easily, and gets his ass kicked by Blake with an attack from behind before running off. That doesn't make him threatening or an interesting bad guy when he's on screen. This just pops into my head now.
What are you doing? Trying to get us all killed?
Oh, and as for Cinder, while I am disappointed that she isn't expanded that much further as a character, she wasn't a terrible character in this volume, and unlike Adam, they at least tried, keyword being tried, to keep her character from being a whiny bitch. But yeah, she was okay in this volume. Still though, she could work on her aim. It's like, oh no, she hit a small part of the kidney. Huh. Then again, John, who's right behind Cinder, didn't think of maybe stabbing her from behind or something, so I guess stupid is contagious or something. As for everyone else, they were okay. They served their purpose in the story, but didn't really keep my interest outside of that. Hell, even Raven, despite the twist in the screen time, was just okay to me as a character. So in comparison to other volumes, I'd say it's also slightly above Volume 4. Speaking of better than Volume 4, the music was a lot better this time around. I love the theme song for its lyrics, instruments, and composition. A lot of the background music is better than Volume 4, especially its composition. And even the reprises / vocals on, aside from the previously mentioned intro song, are a lot better than in Volume 4. Ignite, Smile, the song All Things Must Die, even the credits are pretty good. So, yeah, well, I didn't like Volume 4 soundtrack that much. Volume 5 is a big step up in terms of the music department, and good job to the sound team for that. A shame I'm not ending the review on a happy note, because to me, the worst part of Volume 5 is the fight scenes. Yes, I know I'm beating a dead horse, but this is one of the worst animated parts of the volume. Yes, outside of the fight scenes, the animation looks fine, but when the fight scenes are not slow and clunky, there's a lack of energy in the fight scenes for the most part, save for the Rain and Such Cinder fight. There's a lot more inconsistencies in the shots, i.e. a character landing in a location, and then in the next shot cutting to a different part of the room or removing certain objects that should be there. And there are even scenes where basic filmmaking is thrown out the fucking window. I won't spend too much time on this since there's a video dissecting these fight scenes already, but in episode 12, where Crow is fighting Hazel, Oscar makes his comment about what Hazel is talking about, and they fuck up the scene by not only fucking up the arm Hazel used to block Crow's attack, but in the previous shot, Oscar was behind the two fighting, and based on the eye placement on Hazel and position of the two fighters, he would be talking to Oscar around the stairs section of the main hall or the pillows in front of Hazel, and as I just showcased, that is not Oscar's location. This is basic continuity, and they couldn't even get it right in this scene. Really, what should have happened in this scene would be something like this.
Tell him what you did, Ospen! Don't play the silent card, bastard! I know you're in front of me!
Why am I not attacking him while he's distracted? As a result, all these issues make it really hard to follow the action scenes at points, and as said in the story section, the pacing of the fight scenes are also really bad for the most part. I know a lot of people seem to like the fights with Yang and the group of bandits as well as Blake and Iliad's fight, but I felt they too had some issues with the scene, structure, and the pacing. I'll grant you not as bad as other fights in this volume, but I still found issues with it. And whether or not RWBY is supposed to be about actions or its fight scenes, it doesn't change my opinion that most of the fight scenes in Volume 5, and by extension all of Volume 4, are inferior to the fight scenes in the first 3 volumes. That being said, I do hope the Volume 6 will fix some of these issues because I still enjoy the show in the end. But we'll find out later in the year when Volume 6 comes out if stuff like the fight scenes are improved or not, so I think I'll end it here. So to tie it back to my topic question, is Volume 5 the worst volume of RWBY? Honestly, no. Is it flawed? Oh, absolutely. The story has its issues, most of the fight scenes are bad, and the characters aren't as great as previous seasons, but I'd still argue that outside of the first volume, since the early works aren't as good as later works most of the time, the 4th volume to me is still the weakest volume because the main story sucked, the characters weren't that great when compared to previous seasons, the music wasn't as great, and it was just a boring ride from start to finish. And yes, Volume 4 built up to a lot of stuff in Volume 5, but I still found Volume 4 a boring ride when watching it. So no, I don't consider RWBY Volume 5 to be its worst volume. I think the volume is just okay at best, but far from the worst one I've seen thus far. But at this point, the show should be getting better, not going in the opposite direction. So I really hope that Volume 6 will be an improvement over this and Volume 4.
5th volume of RWBY was very problematic. From its numerous retcons to the piss-poor pacing, and even the poorly done fight scenes, the volume was a mess and regarded by many as the worst volume of RWBY. And while I think Volume 5 was okay at best, and Volume 4 was my least favorite volume, I did state in my review that Volumes 4 and 5 should have been better than Volume 3, not worse. So when Volume 6 got announced, I was a little concerned that they would screw it up again. Not helped by the announcement that Volume 6 would be released exclusively on RoosterTeeth.com, with non-first members getting the episode on the site for free a week after release, due to YouTube's numerous policy changes affecting their channel and monetization for their episodes. And then the reviews came in. People said it was much better than Volumes 4 and 5, that Ozpin and Salem got their backstories revealed and became more interesting, Adam was done dirty according to some people who want a redemption arc for an abuser who doesn't want to stop being abusive, that kind of stuff. So when I heard this, I was a little more willing to give the show a shot, and here we are now. But since the volume did come to an end a while back, big spoiler warning ahead, so there's your warning. Now let's dive in and see if this volume will rise like the moon or crash and burn. So sometime after Volume 5, Team RWBY are heading off to Atlas to do something with the relic they get in Volume 5. I don't know, maybe they needed to get the relic in Atlas? Either way, they take the train next to a mountain filled with snow while it's snowing out, but instead of having to deal with an avalanche, they have to deal with a Grim attack, because as we find out in this volume, the relics attract the Grim. Would have been nice to know that detail before they went to get the relic, but Okay, whatever. So the train crashes, and now Team RWBY has to travel on foot to their destination. Oh god, this is gonna be like Volume 4 all over again. Please don't tell me the main plot is gonna be boring as fuck. Oh, thank god! Stuff actually happens in the main plot this time. Thank you! Actually, that's one thing I noticed with this volume. Whereas Volume 4 had the main plot be boring as hell, while the side plots were the only thing keeping my interest during said volume, Volume 6 has the opposite issue, with the main plot being interesting, while the side plots of Cinder and Neo's returns and Salem's next plan of attack being pretty boring and uninteresting. Also, yes, Cinder survived her encounter with Raven. I'll give you a second to recover from such a big surprise like that. Anyways, back to the main plot. So on their way to Atlas, we get Salem and Ozpin's backstory thanks to the relic containing a genie, as well as another confrontation with Ozpin over him lying to the main group for the umpteenth time in the series. We get more of an explanation about the Silver Eyes thanks to the character of Maria, who is a former Silver Eyes warrior, which is something I can appreciate after they did nothing about explaining how said eyes worked for 2 volumes straight. And we also get the final confrontation between Yang, Blake, and Adam in this volume before the former to kill the latter and send his dead body into a lake after being told numerous times to stop his evil shit and didn't. So, wanna fuck? I mean, killing the guy who tormented me for years was clearly only done so that we could be a couple, so sure. But remember, guys, according to some, Yang and Blake are the evil ones in this scenario for killing an unarmed man. Not the guy who murdered his own followers, pursued Blake numerous times after being told numerous times to stop what he was doing and walk away from it all, murdered innocent people on that radio tower, was going to kill both Blake and Yang without mercy due to Blake rising up against him in Volume 5 and ruining his plan in said volume, therefore taking away his power over her, and also used Yang's PTSD of losing her arm/failure at Beacon against her in this fight. Also, are we sure our protagonists are the antagonists all along? Speaking of fights, I also noticed some complaints about Team RWBY stealing the airship since that it wasn't a heroic thing to do, but the thing with that action is they had to do it since that town wasn't letting anyone leave, and they kinda needed to leave in order for the plot to progress. Last as shown with the later chapters of said volume, that action did have major consequences as it resulted in the mech fight due to said theft, which partially resulted in the giant Grim showing up, and even after all of that, they barely made it out of there after the fight was done, showcasing that an action like that did have consequences, but at the same time, it was a necessary evil they had to commit in order to reach Atlas. And while on the topic of evils, let's talk about the backstory we got in this volume. A lot of people are split in regards to this. Some think it made Ozpin and Salem worse as characters, some think it makes the story worse due to the changes in aspects of it, which I'll cover shortly, but others like the idea since it expands the lore in the world, and to some people, it made Salem and Ozpin more interesting. As for me, I'm neutral on this lore dump for the most part. It certainly did make me understand Salem and Ozpin a bit more since we see their plights and backstory of them being former lovers after he freed from her castle. We see Ozpin's death and how that caused Salem to go into a tailspin and go to the 2 gods to try and revive him, but that doesn't work out and she's cursed with immortality by the 2 as a means to learn her lesson. And then that descends into flat-out extinction for humanity when she riles some people up against the gods, and then they decide to take action on that. So, what, did a second version of humans sprout up millions of years later then? Well, I guess so, since after the gods leave and also destroy the moon for funsies, I guess, humans sprout up again. Oh, and the gods bring back Ozpin as a means to stop Salem and give him immortality as well, which yet again contradicts stuff said in previous volumes.
Addendum 2. So, Ozpin was lying when he said that? Kind of a shitty reason, but yeah. There you go.
As well as tasking with protecting the 4 relics/fix humanity so that when all 4 relics are brought together again, the gods will return and judge humanity. Now, while this lore dump/backstory did expand upon the 2's past since we now see what they were like back then and not told it for the most part, which also means we see Salem's major turning point, that being the death of her lover Ozpin/Ozma, this backstory also has a bunch of issues, one of which is Salem herself. Now that we know her backstory and what she was like back then, there is one word I can describe my thoughts on Salem. Shit. This is our big bad? Some petty bitch who can't handle being told no on 3 occasions? Are you kidding me? Are you serious? This claims to be inspired by anime, right? So why is it that villains like Acnologia and Zara from Fairy Tail have more complexity in their turn to evil than Little Miss Hellspawn? Like I said, all of this started because she couldn't stand being told no. No to her plans of reviving Ozma, no to revolt against the gods, and no to her plans about humanity's future. There were dozens of ways to turn Salem evil, and you chose the equivalent of the entitled kid being told no for the first time? Give me a break. I'm sorry, but I am not a fan of this, and if anything, it makes Salem look worse as a character, because now she's doing this because the precious Ozma told her that she wasn't going through with her plan, and now she wants people to burn/die for it by collecting all the relics and bringing forth the gods. And frankly, that just paints her as a petty bitch who throws hissy fits over being told no. And maybe this is because I'm a petty fuck who hates bland villains in media for older viewers, but if you're going to have your main villain's turn to villainy be because she was told no, why should I take your villain seriously or even say anything other than she's fucking shallow? But I digress. On to the next issue. I thought Ozpin was cursed with his immortality because he failed to stop Salem, right? Now it's because the gods wanted him to stop Salem? Also, when Salem asked for Ozpin to return, the Light God couldn't do it because it would disrupt the balance of life and death, but now he's willing to do it here? I guess that means he's willing to throw away his beliefs at the drop of a hat, but that's still really stupid. It doesn't really paint him as a good character either. You know, maybe Salem does have a point. These two gods really screwed the boots on this one, especially when they kept Salem alive after she didn't learn her lesson the second time, and abandoned humanity instead of just creating humans without the same issues as the previous ones they exterminated. And just to deal with the potential response of they couldn't take away her immortality or are unwilling to take it away, that still makes them look bad since the former makes them look incompetent since they can grant something insanely powerful as that but can't take it away, and the latter makes them look lazy and doesn't paint a good portrayal of them either. So really, no one looks good in this situation, and frankly, the gods should be abandoned because they handled this just as poorly as Salem did when she was told that Ozpin/Ozma couldn't be brought back. I'm also not a fan of Ozpin and Salem's past as lovers. While it does do its job of establishing why Salem turned evil/got corrupted, it still feels off to me. Like they could have picked a better bond/relationship for these two instead of lovers, but just didn't. But yeah, those are my thoughts on the backstory. Really wish it could have been executed a lot better, but hey, maybe future volumes will work on that with other backstories and lordoms they provide. And to be fair for a moment, this is not the first time important lore was handled decently or poorly in this series, or done outside of the main story, so this isn't really new. Still though, this is an issue that should be worked on for future volumes. As for the story itself, well, like I said before, the main plot is a lot better than volumes 4 and 5, largely because stuff like world building and development actually happens in said main plot, and even the pacing is handled slightly better, or at least in the first half, since some episodes did try and stick to one main plot/area at a time, unlike volume 5, where it takes multiple episodes for an event to finish, because there's so many things going on at the same time, and it's all over the place. Granted, the second half does slip into that issue at points, but it's not as bad as the finale to Volume 5, since there's only 2 fights going on for most of the final few episodes before the finale, and then after those 2 are done, there's really only one big fight where everyone comes together to take it on. Granted, it's not a perfect finale, since it is still problematic at points in terms of pacing, but I still say it's at a mediocre pace, which is certainly better than 4 and 5's pacing for its final episodes. Still can be worked on though. And as I stated earlier, the Silver Eyes get more of an explanation in this volume, which is good to see, since now we know that it can only be trained/mastered when facing off against Grimm, that the key to using it is to focus on the relationship the wielder had with their loved ones and protecting them, and that it's not a perfect/one-hit kill technique, since the huge Grim we see in the finale isn't completely petrified and had to be destroyed by the giant mech seen in the earlier fight to take it down. Speaking of overpowering though, it's time I address another complaint brought on by the internet. In the fight against Adam, people have complained about the inconsistency of said fight when compared to the previous ones, i.e. Adam losing to Yang in this fight despite taking off her arm in Volume 3, and while these are understandable complaints, here's why I don't have a major issue with these fights in terms of consistency. At this point in time, Adam is focused on killing Blake and Yang because Blake humiliated him, so he's not thinking clearly. I mean, he killed his followers, so what does that say about his sanity? On top of that, Yang puts it best. She didn't get much stronger, she just got smarter. And one of her biggest failings back then was giving into her anger and charging at Adam like an idiot, which opened herself up for his attack and bye-bye arm. Even Tai Yang tells this to his daughter that her semblance has its issues back in Volume 4, especially when angry, and that's something Yang has had to work on, and as we see here, she has to an extent. only activating her semblance/red eyes after grabbing the sword and not before, which causes Adam to lose his advantage, and only further loses it when she chucks the sword off the cliff, taking away the means for him to take away her arm again outside of maybe using his sheath, but it's likely not that effective as a weapon. If anything, it's the opposite of what Yang did in Volume 3. Adam charged in like an idiot because he let his emotions get the better of him, and he got fucked over as a result, losing his sword and then his life after trying to go for Blake's sword so he can kill them with that instead.
It's like poetry, so if they rhyme.
And yeah, it sucks that Adam is dead, especially since I liked him in Volume 3, but at the same time, at least he went out with some dignity and not a joke like he was in Volume 5. Plus, thanks to the preview that came out before Volume 5 did, we get more confirmation that Adam was a good person originally, but then became corrupted with his beliefs/power over time that turned him into the man that abused Blake, helped give the Faunus a bad name due to his actions, and made him a ruthless killer, showing that power can corrupt anyone, as well as the worst people having the best intentions at first, but over time their moral compass/good nature became more and more twisted. And in this volume, I can say that at least he's still threatening to an extent, thanks to what I described earlier in this video. Frankly, the only complaint I have is that they reused stuff meant for Volume 3 that was deleted in favor of what we got in Volume 3 with Adam versus Yang, since it feels kind of lazy to reuse stuff from 3 volumes ago, even though it is good stuff. But still, I like the fight for the most part thanks to its energy and choreography as well as the development of Yang's semblance and character, so I don't have a major issue with the inconsistency. Speaking of, the fights in general are also a little bit better than Volume 5 in terms of energy and choreography, but it still has its issues of characters standing around at points, such as the mech fight, even though I do like that fight since it gives me Metal Gear Rising vibes of fighting a giant robot with the characters jumping on missiles and fast movements at points. A lot of Team RWBY and Juniper does like to stand around during it, and that is a problem. But on the bright side, at least they don't break basic cinematography rules, so that's good. Character-wise, a few of the main characters did get development, like I previously stated with Yang and the like. Blake got some development to an extent as well, but the biggest one I've noticed was with RWBY herself, since she has gotten some development as both a leader and person, and that's great to see. 6 volumes in, but you know what? I'll take it. At least we finally get her leading the team properly, especially when Crow and Ozpin weren't able to take the helm. Hell, she was able to stand up to Crow after he turns down Jean's idea of taking the airship, something she likely would have never done prior to this point because she respected Crow, and this showed that she was starting to grow a bit as a person. And to that I say, thank you! More of this with RWBY's character, please, not just her getting stronger ability-wise. Frankly, if I wanted just that, I'd read this garbage again. And the rest of the cast is just decent. Not terrible, not amazing, just decent. Cinder and Neo are okay, Oscar is okay, even characters like Crow and Ozpin are just okay. But to be fair, I think by now Team RWBY are meant to be the main leads again, while the remains of Juniper and characters like Ozpin and Crow are supporting characters, so that's probably why RWBY's team is more expanded upon in this volume, while Juniper are kind of shafted for the most part. That being said though, Jean, Rin, and Nora do get a really good moment near the end of this volume where they're gathered in front of a monument honoring Pyrrha, their fallen friend. This was a really touching scene because after all the crap they had to deal with in the last couple of volumes, including the death of their friend, the remains of the team finally get a moment to pay their respects to one of their own who fell in battle 3 volumes ago. Yes, more could have been done with them as characters in this volume, and I do agree that is an issue with the side characters here, but at least it had a couple good moments in it, so it helps, even if it is small. But on the bright side, audio is pretty good once again. From the theme song Rising, to songs like One Thing, Lion Eyes, they're pretty good this time around in terms of instruments, lyrics, and energy. And the voice acting is also handled pretty well, so not much I can complain about there. The art style / animation looks about the same, save for the additional energy put into the fights, so if you did or didn't like it in volumes 4 and 5, your opinion of these volumes' art style and animation will remain the same as it did before. But while my opinion of the art style and animation remains the same, my overall thoughts on this volume didn't. The main story, while not perfect, is somewhat better than Volume 4, the fight scenes are better than Volume 5, and while stuff like the backstory does have its issues and supporting cast is just there, I'd be lying if I said I didn't have some fun with this volume. I guess a good way to compare volumes 4 through 6 is that these are like the prequel trilogy for Star Wars. The first one had its issues, second one is regarded by many as the worst or just mediocre, and the third one is problematic at points, but is seen by many as better than the previous two. But at the same time, all 3 of these are heavily flawed. but this is a 6 or 7 for me. And while I still would like to see it better than Volume 3, you know what? It's a step in the right direction, and I'm hoping Volume 7 is going to do what Volume 6 did with Volume 4 and give us a good odd-numbered volume again. There's a reason why I never covered these two volumes back when they came out in 2019 and 2020, and it's because they're utter garbage. But now, in 2031, RWBY ended with a whimper instead of a bang, so since I don't need to worry about upcoming volumes, I might as well review the volumes that personally killed RWBY for me, rather than the volume with its official death. I could have gone with a pun for that sentence, but these volumes suck so much empathy out of me that I just want to get this off my chest and move on to stuff I enjoy/care about. So, what's the story? Well, Team RWBY goes to Atlas, and then thanks to their stupidity as well as bad writing, Atlas falls and destroys it and the city below it, as well as losing all the relics collected so far to Salem and then falling into a void of darkness. Oh, and we also find out Salem's plan. Divide humanity, and get the 4 relics to bring back the gods and destroy Remnant, finally freeing her of her immortality curse. You know what? No, screw it. I'm not doing this under a normal style. What's the point? There's more effort and refinement than these volumes got in terms of their writing, regardless of if the Q used Monty's notes or not. The pacing is fucking terrible, the storytelling personifies round peg and square hole, and the writing is utterly poor here. And you know what? That's unacceptable for a team of writers who've not only written RWBY for years, but have also been writing professionally for a lot longer. One of which, Kiersey Bookhart, is a goddamn author/novelist. So what happened here? Why did RWBY lie to Ironwood, who's been nothing but helpful/an ally to them, despite the previous volume being against deceiving their allies and friends? Why bring back Penny when you kill her off a volume later?
Welcome to our club! Welcome to our club!
Why completely assassinate Ironwood's character and turn him into a complete monster, as well as making decisions that make no fucking sense in regards to what we know about his character? Why would he work with someone like Watts who tried to kill everyone in the previous volume? Why is Watts' hacking plan so full of holes it could be nicknamed Swiss cheese? Why make the main cast incredibly unlikable? Why make Crow team up with a known criminal who tried to kill him previously in order to take down someone who's been kind to him for a lot longer? Why kill characters off screen, such as in the finale to Volume 8? Why does Volume 8 have so many fucking villains, and why are all of them so incredibly flat? Why is Cinder's backstory utter shit from a pacing and narrative perspective? Should I go on? Because I can! The writing is so bad, I can easily make a list out of it. And I'm gonna elaborate on a few more in a bit. That's how much it bugs me. Now, these are issues I could have excused if they were just starting off in the writing industry and or were rookies, but they're not anymore. 2 of them have been writing for RWBY for a majority of the series now. They get paid to write this. Hell, like I said, one of the other writers is a fucking author who sells published work for a profit and has done so for years. They should be improving in their craft. But as shown with this list of issues and many others I haven't addressed yet, they're not. And that's a damn shame. Maybe it's because of the directors that these issues keep happening, but just because there's a reason doesn't mean I have to like it, and I don't here. This is incredibly frustrating to see happen again and again in this series, because Volume 7 and 8 aren't the only victims of bad writing. 4 and 5 also had this issue. Each volume should be getting better, not worse, but that's what's happening here. Alright. What else is wrong with the writing before I go on? Oh, right. What is the point of giving Penny the maiden powers in Volume 7 if Winter was going to get it the next volume anyways? Why not just cut out the middleman and give it to her in Volume 7? Because it'd be giving Ironwood what he wanted? I mean, Winter getting the power in 8 is giving him what he wanted anyways. And if she wanted to make her own destiny/path, she still could have done that in Volume 8 after getting her powers in 7. Was it done so that Penny wouldn't be a useless side character? I mean, you already have a decent amount of those in the main cast, specifically Crow and the remains of Juniper, so why not go all the way and add Penny to that club, at least to be consistent? Also, why did Penny give the powers to Winter and not her friend RWBY? She planned to give it to RWBY in a previous episode, so why not just do that? She doesn't know if RWBY's dead or not, it's just that she fell. Is it because of the Silver Eyes? Well, RWBY doesn't use them much in these 2 volumes, so what's the harm? Plus, that could be an interesting concept of having a silver-eyed warrior, but also a maiden. But no, let's give it to Winter, who's already going to get it in Volume 7, but the writers instead gave it to Penny in that, and then changed their minds a volume later.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so
I'm into it.
Addendum 3. Some people explained to me why it would be a bad idea to give RWBY the maiden powers after the original video went up, and I agree that it would make her overpowered and not fitting for a Springfield character to get such a cold and depressive ability like the Winter Maiden powers. You know who forgot about this risk, though? The showrunners!
Kill me, and I can make sure the power goes to you.
Narratively, it makes more sense for Penny to give up her powers to her first ever friend RWBY than the likes of Winter, who she barely knew. And looking back on this, there was no point in making Penny the maiden, especially when you were going to kill her off shortly after. Like I said, she would have given up her powers to RWBY if she died. Even the show states this before the finale. So why not just make Winter the maiden in the fucking first place, instead of wasting our time with this crap? God damn, did this shit need a fucking revision. Jesus Christ. Anyways, back to the original video. Also, this is an issue I just noticed, but why are the main powers so underwhelming here? Now that we have Cinder's flashback and Winter getting the powers as well as Penny using the maiden's abilities, yeah, all the powers basically do is slightly amp up their already existing abilities and open vaults. Or at least, that's what I initially thought. See, it turns out they can use whatever element they want, like when Amber used lightning against Cinder when they fought. But here's the thing. The use of other elements by the maidens is used so fucking sparingly in this series that I legit forgot it was a thing. If anything, this makes the use of the maiden powers worse, because here you have so much potential for attacks and movements and all this other shit, and you just rely on already existing semblances just slightly boosted. For fuck's sake, Penny could be using her swords to freeze things, or turn the molecules around her into solids, allowing her to shoot them at enemies. I'm not mad because they didn't go with my ideas. I'm mad because what they ended up going with was just basically have their semblance getting stronger with no actual training. Seriously, what a fucking waste. Oh, and while on the topic of the maidens, I hate the idea that getting all 4 relics will bring back the 2 gods to Remnant. So unless RWBY basically unites all of humanity before getting all the relics, they lose. And if Salem gets all the relics, they lose. In addition, if Salem's goal is to get all 4 relics and destroy the world, and as we see in Volume 8, Ozpin/Oscar knows this, why doesn't he bring up the idea to Team RWBY to destroy one of them? Would it bring back the gods prematurely? Isn't it indestructible? No idea, because nobody brings up this idea. Sure, it means the loss of a relic, but it also means Salem also loses, since it requires all 4 of them. And if it doesn't mean the gods come back, then yeah, destroy it and you win! What the fuck is Salem gonna do, destroy humanity and then rot for all eternity? I don't think that's what she wants. Like, if you have the option, then take it, or at least discuss why it's a bad idea. So easy!
So, why can't we just destroy the relics?
Because it would incinerate all of reality.
5 seconds, people. All it took for this quick rewrite. The fuck is RWBY's excuse? This is also why this evil plan of Salem's is a problem. It not only has such a simple solution that is not even addressed, but it's also a lose-lose situation unless RWBY somehow redeems humanity enough to be spared. Anyways, what else do I gotta bitch about? Oh, yeah, right, the soundtrack. The soundtrack of both volumes is terrible. Most of the songs aren't great in terms of composition, rhythm, or lyrics, and the only exception to this is Hero, because it sounds good in regards to its composition, rhythm, and lyrics, and it's easily the highlight of the soundtrack in both volumes. I feel so bad for Casey and Jeff Williams' talents being wasted in both 7 and 8 soundtrack. They're good vocalists/composers, so to see their great talents wasted on garbage like War, or Nevermore, or The Truth, it sucks. It absolutely sucks. But I digress. Oh, and speaking of sucking, the off-screen deaths of Penny, Watson Ironwood can suck my nuts. Oh, what's that? You may not have known Ironwood died? Well, yeah, all you had to do was head to Miles Luna's cameo page or the wiki to find out that information, because they don't say it in the show.
So, James Ironwood, I hope you can rest in peace.
Yeah, because screw telling our story in the main show. Let's tell this info in external shit like interviews and voice websites, especially for one of the characters treated as a fucking villain in 8. And I kid you not, they actually explained in a panel before Volume 8 came out that it was basically Ironwood's semblance that caused him to pull a 180 in terms of his character. I'm not kidding! Now I'm getting off track, so I think I'm just gonna wrap this up. I could elaborate further about how Ironwood was character assassinated, or how terrible the villains were in this volume, or how Hazel was wasted, or how the animation of fight scenes were a letdown, but, like I said, especially after all my ranting, it's not even fucking worth it. Especially in regards to a series that mostly let me down after Volume 3, and has only had one good volume in that time. That was 5 years of waiting, and I'm not getting any younger waiting for the show to get better, if it even does. If you had someone or something only give you a performance that is good 20% of the time, would you stick around if it wasn't a family member or something you worked on? For me, no. I would just move on and look for something else. Sure, it's tempting to bitch about how a later volume is crap, or is a huge letdown. I'm sure there's going to be plenty of that in Volume 9, but it gets tiring after a while, especially when I could use that time to enjoy something good.
All the frustrating mistakes/issues these two volumes had are unacceptable for the RWBY at this stage in the show. They're supposed to be better than this. And I know I only scratched the surface when it comes to problems these two volumes have. And I'm sure there are plenty more issues that other people on the site have delved into much further. But at this rate, why should I bother delving deeper into it? The show is not getting any better. It's getting worse. And pointing out these issues isn't making me motivated to tear it apart. It's just making me feel sad and hollow towards this show. The passion I had for this show, it's gone. And it died a long time ago. So I can either keep soldiering on in a vain hope for it to get better, or I can finally accept that it's going down a path I can't follow and walk away. And I choose the latter. That's also why this isn't done in a traditional review that I normally do for this series. What's the point? Especially for getting this well detailed for a show that has sucked out so much empathy and passion. When Volume 1 came out back in the day, I was 19. I was just starting college, and I heard about this show from a colleague. It had so much potential, and it only got better and better as time went on, with Volume 3 still standing as my favorite volume of the series. But I'm not 19 anymore. I'm nearing my 40s, at least in this dimension. And all I see RWBY as now is a worn out, wasted husk. So you know what? In my mind, Team RWBY died down there in that void, and their world got destroyed. Because I am done with this show. I am not wasting any more time waiting for the show to get better. I am not wasting the remainder of my life going through the volumes I haven't even covered yet. I am finished with this series. But I know there are those who will proceed on, those who enjoy it. And to them I say, I hope you continue to enjoy the show. This may be the end of my journey with RWBY, but it doesn't have to be the end of yours. And if you disagree with what I said here, you have every right to disagree and call me out. In fact, I absolutely welcome it. I appreciate opposing opinions on something like this. So, yeah, this is the end of my RWBY journey. Thank you all for watching. Best of luck to those who will continue on with this series, especially those in other worlds where 2021 is a thing and will be receiving Volume 9 soon. And take care.
Final addendum. So, Volume 9 came out. I saw a good chunk of it, and I didn't like it. It wasn't as bad as Volume 7 and 8, but it was still bad from a character, story, and animation perspective, at least to me. Also, it took this volume to finally make Blake and Yang official. Piss off. You had ample time to do that, so I'm not going to treat this as a fucking positive just because this show finally decided to stop waffling when it came to this shit. Neo was also a waste of time as a villain. Also, the RWBY suicide scene was a fucking insult to those who had, or are still dealing with, suicidal thoughts. And they have no excuse for this, since mental health issues were on the rise during COVID-19, contrary to what that bullshit report said, so they had oodles and oodles of examples/testimonies to pull from when writing this scene to make sure they handled it with tact, grace, and an overall good execution. And they failed miserably at this. Jesus Christ, this was written so poorly. Wow. Just wow. Also, not much of note was even occurring in this story, which was likely very frustrating for the fans who waited nearly 2 years for Volume 9 just to be given the equivalent of a filler adventure. And yes, I mean filler by its usual definition, not the anime one where they do original shit that deviates from the manga. Overall, I was not a fan of Volume 9, and I feel bad for the fans who waited so long for this. Frankly, you deserved way better. But that's not everything. Outside of the RWBY and Justice League crossover, which I'm not reviewing, just no, I'm not interested, basically. There was a campaign called Greenlight Volume 10. It was technically started by the fans, but it was ignited further by the creators of the show who used it at RTX 2023. Yeah, I don't buy this at all. The creators already said they're working on Volume 10 before being given a green light, so either A, they're being really cocky about the show getting another season without making any backup plans if the higher-ups refuse to give them a 10th, or this is potentially done as a PR stunt. Now, of course, that's not the only two theories out there for this. There's probably other reasons out there, and I'm very much admitting I could be wrong. These are just my guesses. We'll ultimately see in time what the fate of RWBY's 10th volume will be, but something tells me it's already been approved. Who knows, though? I could be wrong. Anyways, that's all I got for this one, so have a great day, everyone.